when it comes to why we need a revolution and why that's important to fighting back against oppression. Because what we've seen throughout all the kind of high points of working class struggle is also the potential to actually begin to uproot oppression. You know, one of the comrades spoke about what happened in Russia in 1917, but right throughout history, whenever you see a revolutionary upsurge, you can often see some of the most oppressed people in society, who are always put on the bottom of the pile, actually right in the front leading. Because when people fight back together against a common enemy, it provides the best opportunity to challenge those sort of backward ideas that you have, and also people's vision of themselves is transformed. You know, all the time, working class people, in particular if you're working class and oppressed, you're told that you're crap, you shouldn't really have a say about how society is run, you're made to feel like you haven't got any self-worth. And when you fight back, that's when you begin to feel 10 feet tall. And therefore, you know, even the smallest of struggles can actually be incredibly important for that process of winning a much wider liberation. Which is why I think it's important when talking about reforms and saying they're not enough. You know, we're not saying that, you know, that they're unimportant. Reforms are incredibly important. One, because they do actually have an impact on our lives, but also reforms can give people confidence to fight for more. You know, I'm not a reformist in the sense that I think, oh, we'll just reform our way to a better society. But if ordinary people win something, then they feel the confidence that, you know what, we can actually have an effect. We're not powerless, and perhaps we could go for more. You know, think of Section 28. You know, it's one of those vile pieces of legislation brought in by Margaret Thatcher's government. How was it uprooted? It was through grassroots campaigning. It was also through bringing LGBT plus liberation politics into the trade union movement and actually winning an argument within the organised working class that you've got to stand in solidarity with us, and you've got to take this seriously. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, and then we beat that piece of legislation that came in. It was about, you know, promotion of homosexuality in schools. Again, you can see the kind of protect the children sort of bullshit around trans rights being pushed, you know, once again. The other thing I want to come back on is about how capitalism can adapt. At the same time, all it does is sort of repackage our liberation and sell it back to us as a commodity. Someone asked about, you know, how changes in the family have kind of, what impact that's had. And, you know, I think one of the kind of interesting periods actually is the 1940s and 1950s, where you saw quite big changes happening within the family. You know, people often think of the 1950s as this particularly sort of puritanical decade, you know, that all the kind of stereotypical images of, you know, mum being at home, dad going to work, that idealised view of the nuclear family. But actually, why is it that the right went into overdrive in that way? It's because the nuclear family had been loosened during the 1940s, during the war. There's a great book on the Blitz talking about, you know, how it, you know, helped the kind of, you know, a much greater conversation, a much kind of you know, broader ideas around sexuality. The Mail did a review of the book. I think the headline was "How Blitz Sent, you know, Britain Sex Mad." But essentially, what it was, you know, large numbers of men go into the army. Women were also come out of the home, go into factories, and also the land army. And there's these sort of first-hand accounts from the British state, which is keeping tabs on people. You know, what do they think about the war and so on. And one of these reports says, you know, men are well versed in homosexual arts in the military. They're like, oh my God, there's all these gay people in the army, and that's because, you know, this loosening of the family actually provides the opportunity for people to have much more varied sorts of relationships. So then, after the end of the war, the right go into overdrive. My God, we've got to put this back in. We've got to put people back into the box. But actually, those material changes had already been happening. So what, you know, capitalism did was say we've got to, you know, allow some limited reform. Actually, homosexuality law reform partly comes out of an acknowledgement from the more kind of, you know, forward-thinking members of the ruling class. Okay, perhaps we've got to give people something. But again, that opens up the possibility for people to push for much more, because, you know, homosexuality law reform happens in '67, and then in the next couple of years you see the explosion of a much more radical politics, which doesn't say we just want a little bit more, we want to go much further. And I think right now we're seeing an opportunity to inject a much more radical politics around LGBT plus liberation. You know, as I said, when I kind of came into this 10 years ago, the dominant politics was a sort of, we just need to get more people onto the boards of companies, isn't this already happening, you know, this is great, there's this onward liberal march of progress. And I think, particularly amongst a young layer of activists, people are pissed off with that. People have had enough and want to actually talk about uprooting oppression properly. And I just want to end by saying I talked about Carl Whitman at the beginning from the Gay Liberation Front, and he said that we know we are radical in that we know the system is that we are under is the direct source of our oppression, and it's not the question of getting our share of the pie because the whole pie is rotten. And I think more people are seeing that the whole pie is rotten. And what we've got to make sure is that we don't just see history repeat itself. Massive radical movements, and then it doesn't quite break through, and it splinters off, it goes back into pressure group politics, and all the rest of it. We've got to learn the lessons of how of why those movements didn't break through. And I think what we've got to say now is, look, you've got this radical politics, we need more of it, but we also need to link it to a bigger working class fight back against that system which causes our oppression. And therefore, if you want to tear the head off that system, we also have to be organised. That's what we try and do in the Socialist Workers' Party, in the Socialist Workers' Student Society as well, is to say, there's a minority under capitalism who understand, right? who want to get rid of that system. Now, we want to be part of broader struggles with people who might not agree with us on revolution yet, but we've got to be an organised force that argues in every single struggle possible that it's not enough just to go for those reforms, as important as they can be in the here and now. We've got to link up those struggles, unite those struggles, and point them against that main enemy, which is the people at the top who screw us over, who exploit us, and then use oppression to divide all of us. And we can have that liberated society, but that means smashing that system as a whole.